I'm a past president of Belmont, BPW, which is just a local club. I don't have time. I used to be a local government councillor. I don't have time to do so. I do my not-for-profit organisation. I've got two of them. One is Belmont Business Enterprise. The other one's textile clothing and footwear business. So that's what I run. I run the forum New York. So this is one that I started 23 years ago. And this one I started 19 years ago. So this helps because I was so this one helps fashion and creativity, and that's where I learned Susan. And this one helps all sorts of passion is something women. So that's why I created the BPW. They know what I'm doing. Some at the higher rate. I'm really threatened by anything that hasn't come from them. Okay, so you're supporting that. Wasn't that back in Davy Jones' era? The map that's mounted? Oh. Oh no, there's seriously. What's on?
भैया किसी और का साउंड आ रहा है इधर कोई और कहीं और बोल रहा है
So what has the organisation done? What are the organisation's projects besides which they've let slip away you know, they basically called me a call about how did this start, and I was sat down like a communicator.
3 नंबर में शुरू है, वहाँ पे भी नहीं चल रहा हुआ साथ में, वहाँ पे वैसे बात कर रहे हो, उनका भी देखो.
We'll have a drink tonight. Discuss this. This time is really happy that people are passionate because Susan has all the creative. She got 360 designers across Canada. In fact, I was trying to get a copy out and it's at least yeah, it's a small world indeed. You get your badge.
Oh, that's a bit strong.
Yes, please. Okay. Yes.
Oh, no, I don't.
Isn't it a small world? You don't need to So I can went to the street.
Awesome.
Okay, well, before you. I got rid of it. You want to do it now? Yes.
Okay.
Here's my session.
The ladies take one for us.
Okay.
Thank you. And then we'll start.
Thank you. Put on the main board. There's got 12 parts to go. And there was a 1
Just actually, I sent it to the
finance stream, and I said, look, I can ask. And I'm trying to get hold of one speaking in a panelist, and she has registered herself on the website, so I couldn't hold it. But it's
Sisterhood.
Indeed. You will say. Thank you, ladies. Shall we start? Good afternoon and thank you for coming through. My name is Dr. Michaela and along with Aparna, we are supporting, we have volunteers that are supporting this session. I would like to welcome and introduce to you Ms. Jenny Abdulla. She is the President of the Business Professional Women Canada, and she will be our lead speaker today. Ms. Jenny, please, over to you.
Thank you so much. I am so glad to be here. I have to say, first of all, that I was really hoping this was going to be a cozy and intimate group. Because when you're in a room full of 200, 300 people, you do tend to circulate a lot of your cards, and when you do go home, you find that you don't remember who the card belongs to. And it is only in these types of very cozy, intimate type of sessions that we can actually have a one-on-one. We can actually feel free to ask questions. We can feel free to share of our time and our expertise.
I hope you're able to hear me better.
Yes, thank you.
And so through these cozy and intimate sessions is where we can build those one-on-ones, and I feel very free to be able to circulate my business cards. Only because when you send me an email and you put on the subject line WEF-2017, I will know that you are part of this group. I actually am very humbled to be here. I feel very fortunate to be amongst so many women leaders and entrepreneurs. I'm even more pleased to be here with a very cozy and intimate group. I've been practicing immigration law in Canada for about 23 years, a bit over 23 years. I have 2 children, both of whom are now in university. So I'm actually going to be an empty nester. Yes, and I'm actually looking forward to it. Yeah. So when I was asked by Dr. Harbin Arora to lead the theme of migration and mobility, I said to her, immigration is the hottest topic no matter where you live. Globally, I think, anytime that you're watching the news especially, immigration is a hot topic and it's dominating the headlines. Now, immigration has always been a hot topic in Canada, and I'll tell you why. Because in Canada, we bring in 1 million immigrants into our country every 4 years. And so, every year, that means 250,000. And I'll give you a sense of numbers because our population is 35 million. And if we're bringing in 1 million people every 4 years, that is quite a feat.
You've got to go behind the speaker. It might stop it. No, it's not working.
We've had challenges all morning.
I can be loud.
Yeah.
I can be loud. We're small enough.
So, sometime last year in my country, I got an opportunity to train.
We next door. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
And so,
Would you need it for them to record? Because this is going to the website. I don't know. Because without the loudspeaker, you won't be audible in the web. You don't need a speaker for
We had a cross signal all morning, so yeah.
all right.
I'll have program.
okay.
Or you have the
So maybe you can come a little forward.
But
Yeah.
Okay.
That's fine.
Great.
thank you.
So with 35 million as our population, 1 million coming in every 4 years, you then see what's dominating on the headlines. So when you're watching the news, you ask the question, what do you see about Canada in particular? Because yes, globally we're seeing immigration, the topic of immigration dominating the headlines. But what is it specifically about Canada? When you look at what is dominating the headlines for Canada, and because we've had an election, so for those of you who know, our new Prime Minister is Justin Trudeau, and I heard cute on one end of the room. Believe me, that has certainly changed the tone. It's changed the tone on a lot of things. When he first was elected, of course, the part that dominated the headlines was it's 2015. That's why I've got, half of my cabinet as women. And so we've seen that that on television there is a certain image, the image of what Canada is when it comes to immigration. And because we see that we're bringing in 1 million people, well, has that ever changed? Since I've been practicing for over 23 years, that number hasn't changed. That number's always been the same. And so you ask yourself, what has changed? And we haven't really seen the changes just because a new government got elected. You'll see that on television, especially when we saw the Syrian crisis, and all of a sudden the announcement of Canada accepted 40,000 refugees. And everyone said, well, something really big has happened in Canada. Something's really changed. But if I were to share with you 3 facts, you may think differently. For example, every year we've brought in 20,000 refugees, no matter what. We've always done that. For the last 23 years that I've been in practice, that number hasn't changed. And if we've brought in those 20,000 refugees, it's been because of our international obligation. It's been because of our agreement at the United Nations on how we're going to handle the intake of refugees. And so that number has not changed. What's changed? The fact that we've been making the headlines 40,000, well, what is that 40,000? Because the second fact, if I were to share with you, is that the 20,000, the intake of 20,000 happened during the election year, and 3 months later we actually changed the year, and so the 20,000 were for the following year. So when we had a new government that got elected, what had happened is that the previous year the government had not accepted any refugees. So when the announcement went out and it was about 40,000, well, that was because the 20,000 from the previous year had not been accepted yet. And then the government that came into power was running on the election, the platform of being able to accept refugees. So when the 40,000 was announced, it was actually the 20,000 from the previous year and the 20,000 for the current year. And so what you saw on the headlines is Canada gets a new prime minister, and the next thing you hear is the 40,000 being, refugees entering our country. And so you think, oh, something really big has changed in Canada. But it really hasn't. We haven't felt yet the changes that are, in the works or are coming to, coming to fruition. So a lot of times when we look at the media and we rely on social media, you will notice that the information that is being let out there is filtered or not, or embellished or exaggerated. And sometimes what you see is not exactly the way it is. And of course now you know what's happened with things south of our border, and you see what's happening in the United States. So you start to see immigration being handled differently by different countries. And then immigration is also a topic where a lot of us, have different ideas about, different perspectives about, different opinions about, depending on what's happening in our own country. And then watching what's happening globally. So let me share with you, what Canada is doing. So for example, you remember I told you 1 million people every 4 years, 250,000 every year. Well, out of that 250,000, how many do you think are refugees? Well, if our national obligation is 20,000, that means less than 10% coming into Canada are actually refugees. So if we're taking in less than 10% of our intake of the overall immigrants that we're accepting into the country, who are the other 90%? Because the headlines and the social media are covering the less than 10%. Who are the other 90%? And you'd be surprised to see that most of our immigrants are actually economic immigrants. They're the ones that are coming into Canada to study hard, work hard, raise their families, work and pay taxes and boost our economy. So what is Canada doing? It's being very selective on who it's bringing in and for what reason. And to give you that, when I said our population is at 35 million, I should share with you that our population is actually an aging population. We have more old people than we have young people. And so we've arrived at this point where we need to bring in young people because our women are not producing enough children. Our women are producing an average of 1.2 if there is such a thing, right? Like 0.2. What does that mean
Actually,
exactly?
it's hard to just join together.
You know,
the sixth one.
that's what it's exact. So they're not even having 2, right? You're at 1.2 children, and if you're at 1.2 children, if you have an aging population and women are not producing enough children, you have no choice but to look at immigration to be able to bring in the people that you need to actually run your country. Because you have labor demands, and now you have shortages to fill based on those labor demands. So what is going to really happen? You're going to look at how you are selecting and the kind of people that you're selecting. You know, there are countries that are considered source countries. And when you look at Canada and you say, where are the people coming from really, and for what reason are they coming in? Because at the end of the day, yeah, let's go back to the headlines and let's talk about the 10% or the less than 10% that we're bringing in as refugees. Because, you know, when there's so much negativity about immigration or about refugees, you know, even if it's that less than 10%, the headlines actually put a positive spin on things. And it basically allows Canada to share their positive stories, to be able to share some of their you know, success stories. Because a lot of work is being done in Canada, and we're very proud of what we do with refugees. Not to say that there are no challenges, right? There's always going to be challenges. We may not have it perfectly worked out, but there are a lot of success stories. And we've got to say to ourselves that there are opportunities to learn from each other, from our countries, and looking at some of the source countries of Canada, you see that there are, you know, countries that are actually very crowded, and we see more of those countries and their people coming into Canada. I think that over the years, here are a few things that I've seen. You know, for as long as there is going to be poverty, for as long as there's going to be violence, for as long as there is going to be war, we will have populations that are mobile. We are going to see an increased level of mobility. Because at the end of the day, I think each and every person is looking for a better opportunity. And it is in this search for a better opportunity that we actually tend to talk and be focused on patterns of migration. I wanted to share a little bit about myself. So let me start with, I was born in Africa, in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam. So, you know, I say to some people sometimes, well, I'm African because, you know, I was born in Africa. And, you know, I moved to Canada when I was only 10, so a lot of times, of course, I was schooled in Canada and United States and the UK. And so, of course, when I talk to people, I say I'm Canadian. And they're like, you're Canadian? Oh, but where were you born? Oh, I was born in Africa. Oh gosh, you're not black and you're not white. Like something like right in between, right? And so they say, oh, so is there like some other, like, okay, we're, you know, it causes confusion. And the confusion is this. So you look at me, and a lot of times I get, so are you Indian? Are you like, right?
there's confusion. And 5 generations ago, our ancestors came from India. And actually, this is the first time I've ever been to India. When I said to my parents, I'm going to India, I told my husband, I'm going to go to India. And of course, my parents right away were, oh my gosh, we're Indian. My mom said, I'm coming with you. And I'm like, we're Indian? And that was like, you're not born in India? My mom's like, yeah, I'm born in Africa. And Grandma's not born in India. No, Grandma was born in Africa. And she said to me, 5 generations ago, we're Indian. I said, Mom, the only thing I do Indian is eat and watch. So I eat Indian food and I watch Indian movies. She started laughing. There's confusion. Why is there confusion? I think it's because we are in this really unique time where people are mobile. I mean, today, if you want to go deliver a session, you just hop on a flight and you're there. I do this for a living, right? With immigration, you're always working either in a different time zone. Like I live in Calgary, 1 hour from Vancouver. And a lot of times I'll group my clients based on what time zones they come from. And I'll say, today I'm working on Australia time, is 16 hours ahead, right? And that's actually been a great thing for me as I've been raising my children and working on different time zones. I'm able to do things with my kids, and it's been a perfect career. But at the same time, we go back to this issue of identity, and we go back to this issue of, and I think it's immigration that forces us to actually think about those kinds of things. I want to also share with you a little bit about, we talk about diversity all the time because we talk about why we should work on this and what is it that really makes us think about this and work at it. Why do we need to work at diversity? I mean, with populations moving around so much, it's almost become a necessity. It's become a necessity. And I think it is also by deliberate effort. We need to actually make a very deliberate effort at this because it does not necessarily come naturally to us. There is this movement. People are moving around to look for better opportunities. Yet, we need to work on this piece on diversity. And I think that we need to actually walk away today. If you're going to walk away with just one thing from my session, walk away with this. Walk away with, there is a difference between diversity and pluralism.
Namaste. Welcome to our land.
Sorry.
The reason I bring this up is because diversity is to actually recognize that there are differences. Diversity is actually to tolerate differences. But pluralism is to go a step further from diversity. Pluralism is about embracing differences. Diversity is about tolerating differences. We recognize that we're different, and we tolerate our differences. That doesn't necessarily mean that we accept and embrace. And so if we talk about diversity by itself, it doesn't necessarily talk about this next step, which is pluralism. So if you're going to walk away from this session, yes, this is about migration, but know that migration and mobility brings us together in a way where we are more aware of our differences And if we don't make a deliberate effort in embracing these differences, it would be very difficult to be living with each other. The other piece I wanted to bring into this was the fact that the Syrian crisis has forced us actually to think of things in a different way. Let's just pose this question. If it was any other country, would we, and by we, all of us, representing, over 100 countries during this conference, would we accept any other country being at war for over 6 years? If this was any other country in its 6th year of war, affecting the stability of 9 other countries, would we allow for this to continue in this way? And I don't have the answer to that, but I think that if this were any other country affecting 9 other countries and their stabilities, I don't think that generally speaking we would have allowed for this war to continue in the magnitude that it has continued. And so the question to ask is, if we have stood by and if we have not spoken about this, or that we have not taken steps to even ask that question, and yet, in general, we start to, question the movement of people. Because remember, when people move around, it's always in search of a better opportunity. Nobody has, if someone wants to move to another country, I don't think people just move to another country because, I feel like it. I think it's more like, I'm not doing too well here, and so let me think about something else or somewhere else. And so if immigration or migration has to do with looking for that better opportunity, then how should we be taking in these pools of populations that are actually mobile? And so in Canada, I must share that we tend to be, and you've seen it, the headlines are showing that we tend to be welcoming our refugees, and we tend to be opening up in terms of how to receive them, but also how to work on integrating them. And again, it's not perfect. It's not perfect, but it is always going to be work in progress. And I think that what you see on television, for example, is all the Syrian refugees arriving, our Prime Minister, offering winter coats. Now, not every, Syrian coming in will have that treatment. Some of this is political, right? And some of this, we have to admit, was part of what happened during the election, the platform on which the new government was running on. But we do have in Canada some great examples to share. And so, as people come in, and when they come in, they are convention refugees, and then they become permanent residents of Canada. And then, of course, after meeting a certain residency requirement, they can apply for citizenship. But I want to also share with you the issues that we may have where citizenship is concerned. Because it's one thing to be able to bring in refugees and to make them permanent residents of Canada while they are fleeing war, while they're fleeing from violence, while they're fleeing from poverty. to be able to accept refugees as permanent residents, it can't just stop there. Because the goal should be to make them citizens of Canada. And we are not quite there yet, because our citizenship rules revolve around certain criteria, and one of the criteria is about language. And so, if you're going to take in refugees, and of course we should expect them to speak English, which is a global language. However, let me put this for your consideration. When you accept refugees, and you know that you are accepting refugees who are, of course, vulnerable, marginalized, people fleeing frantically from their terrible situations, many times war-torn countries. And a lot of times, these refugees don't even read or write their own language. So how are you going to be able to teach English to someone who cannot even read and write in their own language? If they are illiterate, they've never had formal schooling, they've escaped a war-torn country, how are we going to ensure that they are able to score a 7 on an IELTS? So equivalent to a high school or university graduate. To put that kind of a criteria on someone who fled their country is to actually exclude them from gaining citizenship. And could that mean that we are in favor of a tiered citizenship? Are we creating classes of citizenship? Are we exaggerating our differences, thereby creating tensions, rather than looking for common ground, rather than looking for what we have in common? And I will tell you what, from my perspective, practicing immigration, citizenship, that which we all agree on. Because citizenship is about participation in one's society. If you look up the meaning of citizenship, and it doesn't matter which country you come from, citizenship is about participation in one's society. So let me ask you the question. Is language the only way of participating in your society? What if a refugee who works and pays taxes, and I'll give you a common example, a refugee who works at a poultry farm cutting chicken, does not need the English language, needs a very basic language ability, but is able to work, take care of his or her family, and pay taxes? Is that not called participating in one's society? Because if the fact that this person is employed, goes to work, earns money, takes care of his or her own family, and boosts the economy while paying taxes. Just a thought. When one volunteers in one's community, is that not equal to participation in one's society? So if we're only going to, think about language and press on the language, and for people who are not even, literate or don't even know how to read and write their own language, how would we possibly expect them to be scoring at a 7 on an IELTS? The other thing I want to share with you is that we had studies. We have studies that show
that immigrants, and now I'm talking about the other, majority of immigrants coming in, so not the refugee category, but looking at other immigrants that come in. In Canada, we have immigrants that are highly entrepreneurial. In fact, we have immigrants who take greater risks than those born in Canada. We have statistics that show that immigrants tend to take more risks in business. We have stats that show that immigrants are more willing to tap into markets in a more diversified manner. Our stats show that immigrants are more willing to export and bring in products, think outside of the box, and do that which is not necessarily the status quo. Canadians look at, when they think about, exporting or importing, they generally look at our neighboring countries. But immigrants tend to look at the global markets. Immigrants tend to look outside of the box. Immigrants take greater risks. Immigrants tend to be more successful in business. And a couple of examples are BlackBerry and Saputo. These are immigrant entrepreneurs and have been highly successful. So I'd like to stop here if you have any questions for me, because I'd like to think about, what might be of interest to you, or what is happening at your end that you could contribute, to this delivery.
I have to put this in a New Zealand context in. I want to know if you've got this problem. Now, we have 2%, I've done the numbers, every year coming into New Zealand. That would mean, just done the numbers for New Zealand, we have 60,000 coming in. That would be the equivalent of you having 700,000 coming into Canada. And it's put phenomenal pressure on housing, on the infrastructure, which is, I've been to Shanghai, they don't know what traffic is. Delhi, guys, you don't know what traffic is. We have massive, we call it the motorways car park, isn't it? and medical and health, but in particular, our biggest problem is that there was no way that any country with what we've got, and I'm wondering if you've got the same or coming into this, we have New Zealanders and any basically educated, or I don't know whether they're educated or not, graduates coming out of university, they have no hope, if they're New Zealanders, doesn't matter who they are, of buying a home in New Zealand now for 20 or over, between the 20 to 35. No hope. The infrastructure,